today. He appeared to eye some of the jurors as they made their way to the jury box, but he did appear to be happy this morning. He was hugging his defense team, his 8 lawyers there at the table, and his family showed up in force today. His mother, 6 children are there to support him, and we saw him blowing kisses to them as things got underway this morning.
The walls are closing in on Diddy, and as the feds dig deeper, the list of issues get thicker and thicker. His years of power and fame won't save him now. Stick around for the full story.
There's really no deal that the U.S. Attorney's Office can offer, and it's certainly not one that Diddy will accept. It would involve decades in federal prison. We're talking about mandatory minimum sentences of 10 years for both the charges and the victim. So we know that Diddy has fought charges before. There were state charges, there were gun-related, the nightclub shooting with J-Lo, but he's going to dig in his heels, and this case is going to trial. So if you're prosecutors, you really want to make sure that your evidence is bulletproof before you go down that route.
The courthouse was already a circus before the trial even started, with lines snaking around the building and people vying for a chance to step inside. Reporters, spectators, and curious onlookers packed the sidewalks, all drawn by the spectacle of a high-profile trial involving a man whose fame and power had loomed large for decades. Some were so desperate to get in that they were willing to pay hundreds of dollars for someone else's spot in line. Inside, the scene was just as chaotic, body to body, as the courtroom filled with family members, former associates, and a mix of familiar faces known from legal circles. Diddy's entire family was present, save for his youngest daughter, with his children and even extended family members gathering to witness the beginning of what promised to be a deeply personal and publicly scrutinized battle.
In this case, the defense really wants to get into a lot of intimate personal questions and try and find jurors who are not going to convict based on the fact that they're going to be exposed to a lot of sexual themes and evidence that shows multiple partners for one person. They want jurors who are able to put that aside and just listen to the law and make a decision on the facts and the evidence. This is a case where certainly your jurors matter.
The jury itself was a diverse mix, a collection of people from various backgrounds and professions, including a scientist, a retired Verizon worker, and individuals with connections to law enforcement. Their expressions revealed little, though a few jotted notes diligently as the opening statements unfolded. Both sides had fought hard over jury selection, with disputes over racial bias in the government's strikes, but in the end, a panel was seated, 8 men and 4 women, all over 30, tasked with weighing the evidence of a case that was already dominating headlines. The prosecution, led by Emily Johnson, wasted no time in setting the tone, painting Diddy as a man whose influence masked a darker, violent side. The narrative was familiar, but hearing it in court gave it weight. Allegations of kidnapping, arson, drug trafficking, crimes, and obstruction spilled into the courtroom, tied together by a web of control and intimidation. The culture of silence that once insulated celebrities is beginning to crack. No longer can claims of ignorance serve as a shield when so many insiders have started to speak out. Former employees, collaborators, and party attendees are coming forward, some reluctantly, others seizing their moment to finally share what they witnessed. Every new voice adds weight to the allegations, painting a picture of an environment where abuse of power was not only possible but normalized. The legal strategy for Diddy's defense hinges on dismantling these testimonies, casting doubt on motives, and framing them as opportunistic attacks driven by fame and money. However, the volume of allegations makes it increasingly difficult to dismiss them as mere fabrications. Johnson laid out how Diddy's obsession with control led to years of abuse, focusing first on Cassie, whose civil suit had sparked public attention long before the criminal trial began. The prosecution named her outright, foregoing the anonymity often granted to alleged victims, and recounted incidents of physical abuse, threats with firearms, and the exploitation of explicit videos as tools of coercion. The jury heard about nights when Diddy, enraged by Cassie's interactions with other men, resorted to violence and manipulation, using his wealth and influence to orchestrate sordid events where women were flown across states, provided with drugs, and subjected to degrading treatment. These so-called freak-offs, rebranded as Wild King Nights, became a recurring theme, a symbol of Diddy's alleged abuse of power, where employees facilitated the logistics, ensuring every demand was met down to the specific appearance of the women involved.
The jury has finally been selected, and opening statements are getting started in the Sean Diddy Combs trafficking trial. Prosecutors are expected to paint Combs as the head of a criminal organization who exploited his fame and fortune to sexually abuse women and men. Defense attorneys plan to counter by saying Combs was not acting illegally and all relationships were consensual.
The prosecution emphasized that this case was not about private sexual preferences, but about a pattern of criminal conduct. Jane, another alleged victim, was introduced into the narrative, a single mother who became entangled in Diddy's world in 2020. Her story mirrored Cassie's in many ways: initial charm followed by escalating demands, participation in freak-offs under pressure, and a growing sense of entrapment. Jane's attempts to regain control, like selecting participants herself, were portrayed as futile gestures against Diddy's overarching dominance. The prosecution outlined how even basic safety measures were ignored, with accusations that Diddy refused the use of protection during these encounters, further underlining the imbalance of power and the disregard for the women's autonomy. At the heart of this storm is the question of accountability. The entertainment industry has long operated under its own set of unwritten rules, where fame afforded not just privilege, but protection. What's happening now is a fundamental challenge to that system. The public is no longer satisfied with surface-level apologies or vague statements of support for victims. There is a growing demand for tangible consequences, for actions that match words. This shift in expectations is forcing both individuals and institutions to reevaluate their responses. Record labels, streaming platforms, and brand partners are facing pressure to distance themselves from tainted figures, balancing the risk of alienating fan bases against the reputational damage of perceived inaction. Emily Johnson methodically connected these incidents to a broader RICO conspiracy, presenting Diddy's inner circle not as passive bystanders, but as active enablers of his alleged crimes. The defense, led by Tenny Garagos, responded with a strategy aimed at humanizing Diddy while drawing a sharp line between moral failings and criminal culpability. They conceded Diddy's temper, his history of violence, and his struggles with substance abuse, but framed these behaviors within the context of toxic relationships, rather than organized criminal activity. Their argument hinged on the assertion that while Diddy's actions were reprehensible at times, they did not constitute the crimes he was accused of.
Today, he appeared to eye some of the jurors as they made their way to the jury box, but he did appear to be happy this morning. He was hugging his defense team, his 8 lawyers there at the table, and his family showed up in force today. His mother, 6 children are there to support him, and we saw him blowing kisses to them as things got underway this morning.
Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere remained charged, with media personnel scrambling for updates and members of the public caught up in the spectacle. Yet, despite the chaos, the trial had only just begun. The opening statements had laid out the battleground, but the real weight would come as witnesses testified, evidence was examined, and the jury grappled with the uncomfortable intersection of celebrity, power, and accountability. As court resumed, anticipation filled the air. The opening statements had set the tone, but now the focus shifted to the evidence and the people whose testimonies would shape the jury's perception. One of the most anticipated witnesses was Cassie, whose allegations had been publicly known, but never dissected in a courtroom under oath. Another key figure was Mia, Diddy's longtime assistant, whose insider knowledge of his operations and personal life promised to offer crucial insights. For the jury, these witnesses represented more than just stories. They were living proof of the prosecution's argument that Diddy's private misconduct crossed the line into criminal territory. As the trial progressed, each piece of evidence added layers to an already complex case. The prosecution presented communications, financial records, and video footage, painting a picture of deliberate, calculated actions aimed at maintaining control over the women in Diddy's orbit. They described how his staff facilitated travel arrangements, managed payments, and ensured that his explicit preferences were met without question. Each detail, from the specific appearance of the women to the drugs supplied at events, was used to illustrate how power and influence were weaponized. The jurors were asked to consider not just the acts themselves, but the infrastructure that allowed them to continue for years. For Diddy, the battle ahead is as much about public perception as it is about legal defense. His once untouchable brand has already suffered significant damage, with endorsements dropping and projects put on indefinite hold. The longer the case drags on, the harder it will be to recover, regardless of the legal outcome. In the court of public opinion, redemption is no longer guaranteed by a verdict alone. The prosecution, in turn, reinforced their central theme. Power, influence, and fear had created an environment where consent was compromised, where choices were shaped not by free will but by manipulation and intimidation. They pointed to the consistency of patterns across different victims, the logistical support provided by Diddy's employees, and the calculated measures taken to maintain control. The prosecution framed these elements as unmistakable markers of a RICO conspiracy, urging the jury to see beyond individual incidents to the broader system of abuse. As the trial neared its conclusion, closing arguments brought the competing narratives into sharp focus. The prosecution reiterated the gravity of the allegations, emphasizing the evidence of coercion, the systemic nature of Diddy's actions, and the impact on the victims' lives. They appealed to the jury's sense of justice, asking them to hold Diddy accountable not for being a flawed individual, but for engaging in criminal conduct that exploited his power and influence. The defense, in their final appeal, warned against criminalizing personal failings, arguing that the government's case was built on moral outrage rather than legal merit. They asked the jury to uphold the principle of presumption of innocence, to resist the pull of public opinion, and to focus solely on the evidence within the framework of the law. The jury was then tasked with the weighty responsibility of deliberation. Behind closed doors, they sifted through the testimonies, the evidence, and the arguments, seeking clarity amidst the noise. The diversity of their backgrounds, once a point of contention during selection, now became an asset, as different perspectives enriched the discussion. Their verdict would not only determine Diddy's fate, but would also resonate far beyond the courtroom, reflecting broader societal debates about power, consent, and accountability in an era where celebrity no longer guarantees immunity.
We're here at the Diddy trial. This is day one, and so much activity and so much interest on this case. You can see these cameras here from all over the world now placed outside 500 Pearl Street, which is the location of the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. You see people trying to make their way, whether they're on a lunch break or whatever they're doing here on the streets in Lower Manhattan. Justine, if you walk with me here a little bit, because we want to get into what happened this morning. We had the jury that was seated. So you have 12 people, 8 men, 4 women, a mixture of people from Manhattan, the Bronx, and Westchester. And they're going to be hearing the evidence that's going to be presented. Opening statements already underway, and you hear some of the prosecution's main arguments. They are accusing Sean Diddy Combs of running a criminal enterprise, including and
outside the courthouse, the media circus continued unabated. Commentators dissected every development, social media buzzed with opinions, and the public watched with a mixture of fascination and judgment. The trial had transcended its legal boundaries, becoming a cultural touchstone in conversations about fame, abuse, and the justice system. For Diddy's family, the ordeal was far from over, regardless of the outcome. The scars of public scrutiny and personal betrayal would linger long after the cameras packed up and the court adjourned. Yet, beyond the courtroom theatrics, the emotional toll on the victims cannot be understated. For many, this trial represents not just a legal battle, but a personal reckoning with years of trauma. The courage to come forward, to relive painful experiences in the public eye, speaks to the broader importance of this case. It is not merely about punishing one man, but about validating the experiences of those who have been silenced for too long. As the trial unfolds, the entertainment industry will be forced to confront its own reflection. The glamour and allure of celebrity culture will be juxtaposed against the harsh realities of abuse, exploitation, and moral compromise. The outcome of this case, regardless of the verdict, will send ripples through Hollywood and beyond, serving as a stark reminder that fame can no longer serve as a shield against accountability. In the end, the verdict was more than a judgment on one man's actions. It was a reflection of how society grapples with the complexities of power, influence, and personal accountability. Whether the jury found Diddy guilty or acquitted him, the trial had already left an indelible mark, forcing uncomfortable questions into the open. It was a stark reminder that behind the glitz of celebrity lay human frailties, and that justice, however elusive, demanded a reckoning beyond the allure of fame.